Ready or not? Oh, good. I'm glad somebody's ready. This is good news. We've got to be ready. You know, our readings towards the end of the liturgical year are very powerful readings that remind us that we've got to go the distance. We've got to go the distance. And so often, you know, we're kind of just floating along. We're kind of just moving along. Between last week and this week, now again, I want to set this all up because these readings are, Jesus has entered into Jerusalem, and basically these next 3 weeks are going to be the parables in chapter 25, which would be like Tuesday of Holy Week. Jesus is now in Jerusalem and his death is imminent. So these are the final teachings that he's going to give before he's crucified. These are so incredibly important. Between last week and this week, we basically skipped most of chapter 23 and chapter 24. And if you haven't had a chance to go and read them, I highly recommend that you look at least at chapter 24, because in chapter 24 is when Jesus talks about the coming tribulations. When he talks about how there's going to be persecutions and how there's going to be all sorts of issues, and only those who persevere will get through. He'll even talk about how the world will be kind of cast into darkness. There'll be wars, there'll be famines, he talks about. Now, I'm going to say, based on just looking at the news every day, we're probably in the end times. It's got to be kind of somewhat imminent, it feels, because everything Jesus mentions in chapter 24 has happened down through the ages, but seemed to be ramping up in our time. And whether it truly is the end or not, we ought to be getting ready as if it were the end, because we're close. We're close. We don't know the day nor the hour. Jesus just told us that, but he did say, know what to look for. Know what to look for. You know, I love St. Faustina's diary, and in her diary, there are many times when she talks about falling into a spiritual darkness, which helps me so much to know that a saint like Faustina went through such trials herself. Those periods in her own prayer life when she felt abandoned by the Lord, when she felt left out by the Lord. And those are moments that all of us can kind of go through. Those moments of darkness, those moments of just feeling like we're being enveloped by the evil in our world, the evil in our lives, the evil in our homes. Just being enveloped by all the crushing blows that sometimes come. But here's the thing. Always remember this. No matter how dark anything ever gets, all it takes is one candle to dispel the darkness. If you've ever been in a really dark room, you know what I'm talking about. You can take out the little flashlight on your phone and turn it on, and all of a sudden you can see it. It's like, oh, wow, I feel better now because I'm not in darkness anymore. But for us as Christians, how does this all come together? So what are we doing getting ready for the coming of Christ? Today's reading is one of those curious readings. It's one of those curious parables. As one of his last 3 parables in Matthew's gospel, what's going on? Didn't it seem a little odd to you that the wise version said, sorry, we don't have enough for you? Didn't that seem a little rude? That's kind of how we would take that. But you got to remember, when Jesus is speaking in parables, he's speaking allegorically. So this oil that he's talking about, this light, let's flash back. Now, Matthew's gospel is masterfully put together. Flash back all the way back, well, it was actually like in January, February when we started to read Matthew's gospel again. Do you remember those readings in the beginning of the liturgical year when we did the Sermon on the Mount? We all know the Sermon on the Mount. What's one of the very first things that Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount? You are the light of the world. Let your light shine so brightly so that all may see the good that you do. No one puts that light under a bushel basket. No one clouds it in evil and sin. Jesus is talking about grace. He's talking about grace. See, you know, if it were just about these 10 virgins, and he leaves out the key piece of the phrase, foolish and wise, if he leaves that out, these 10 virgins, these were individuals, as he's presenting them, these are individuals who were consecrated and waiting for the Lord. In his time, there were groups of these individuals who consecrated themselves and said, we're waiting for the Lord. And so these were not the fringe of society. These weren't the tax collectors. These weren't the terrible. These are the ones who are there waiting and ready. except some were foolish. Wisdom is an important characteristic for those preparing, and it has to remain an important characteristic. How do we trim the light of our lives? It requires wisdom. You know, it's interesting. There's a lot of people in this world today that are filled with an awful lot of knowledge, but knowledge without wisdom is rudderless. It goes nowhere. I could know a lot of things, but not know how to apply them. I could have a lot of fancy information in my head that can impress people, but I don't put it into my life. So, you know, I can know the 10 Commandments. I can know that telling a lie is wrong. I can know that, but yet I continue to lie. Well, the wisdom would be, no, become a more truthful person. Work on being truthful. Trim the lamp of your life for virtue and truth and goodness. And that is a challenge to you and me, because a lot of times we think, you know, going into heaven is a slam dunk. Just as long as I'm basically an okay person, I'm in. And yet these 5 foolish virgins didn't get in. I mean, our odds right now are 50-50. If we're that, you know, it's like, that makes me a little nervous. But think of grace. Think of our need for grace. Think of grace as being that oil that energizes the flame of our lives. The flame that we're supposed to be, the light that shines in the darkness. There are a lot of people in darkness right now. There's a lot of lives that are being crushed by the evil and the blows that they're receiving. Can we be a light in that darkness? That's what we're called to do, which means we have to fill our lives up with more grace. We need more grace. We can't live and do the goods that we're supposed to do without the grace of God bestowed upon us. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are the sources of grace? The old catechism, what is a sacrament? An outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. Thank you, Marie. To give grace. It was an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. The sacraments are grace. It's part of how we fill ourselves up with grace. Worthy reception of the Eucharist gives us oodles of grace. Going to confession, sanctifying grace. But there are different types of grace. And so not just the sanctifying grace, but the real graces, the actual graces, the graces that we can receive in our spiritual life. You know, the prayers and the novenas that you do, those have grace attached to them. The rosary, there are graces that are imparted to us. And so the foolish ones are the ones that think, I can skate through, I'll be okay at the end. But the one thing I can't do for you, there's so much I can do. I can pray for you, I can do all of this, but the grace that I receive. And that's why the wise ones are looking at them saying, I'd love to give this to you, but I can't. You have to get it yourself. And that's what they say, go and buy it yourself. You have to go get it. And they weren't ready when the time came. And so we're supposed to be in that constant state of preparation. So remember where we are now. A couple of weeks ago, we started this series, and that was the day that they tried to trap Jesus with the Roman coin. Remember that one? Their own hypocrisy of carrying around a pagan god with them. They weren't ready. Give to God what belongs to God. Hear those words again and again. Everything you have is from God. So you have to give everything back to Him. Then we had the commandment to love, you know, but not that drippy societal love that we have today, you know, like the love song love, that, you know, everything. No, real love. Again, flash back to the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Are we doing that? Are we loving our... I mean, look around in our culture. If we're following the ways of our culture, there's no way that love of enemy is part of what we're seeing. We have to remember, my dear brothers and sisters, we are called as followers of Jesus Christ to get ready for the coming judgment. We don't know when it's coming. Be ready at all times. Because if you're not, it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be pretty. Love. And now we get this reading. Light. Be light. Hearkening back to you with the light of the world. I love the way Matthew has done this in his gospel. What Jesus laid out as his Magna Carta in the beginning, he's now saying, and this is how it's going to pan out. So the next 2 weeks, we're really going to get loaded up with 2 more very powerful parables. two more very important parables. The parable of the talents next week, which means you got to make a return to the Lord. From what he gave you, what have you done with it? How many souls were saved because of you? How many people in darkness were brought into the light because of you? Even if it's just one, that's all he asks for. But then the one that is really the most chilling of all the parables that Jesus gives is the very last one he gives in Matthew's gospel, the great judgment, separating the sheep and the goats. You're going to hear that in 2 weeks. Separating the sheep from the goats. And there's not going to be any excuse given. Lord, when didn't we do it for you? When did we do? When you did it for the least, you did it for me. No excuses. So the final four things in our theology: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. My dear brothers and sisters, I was given a task. I want to get into heaven, but I'm not going to get there if I lied to you. So I'm telling you the truth right now. You will one day be judged. Be ready for it. At the end of our liturgical year, this is what the church wants us to reflect on. Be ready for it. Be ready for judgment. Be ready for the coming and impending judgment of Jesus Christ. It's imminent, my dear brothers and sisters. It could be right around the corner. It could be before I finish this sermon. You know, it's like one of those things. It could be that soon. But I know you're preparing. I know you love the Lord. I know you're striving and trying. So keep doing it, please. Keep saying another rosary for a soul you know that's lost. Keep loving your enemies, that person that gives you the most agita in your life. Love that person. Don't reject that person. Keep striving to be the light in this world of darkness. Keep striving, because you're doing so much already. Another little step. What a difference we could make in this world. Just taking our prayers from the confinement of here into this world of darkness. Think of how much we, just this group here, could do in just this neighborhood here. So please, my dear brothers and sisters, don't put a bushel basket over your light. Don't cover your light. Don't let your oil run dry. Soak up as much grace as you can from the Lord. Get it into your hearts and into your souls. And then take that out into the world as a light shining before others. The good news of Jesus Christ, Lord and Savior. The good news that others need to hear. And then encourage them. Encourage them to be part of this assembly of Christ. Encourage them to come to Jesus Christ. Don't leave them in the darkness. Bring them to the light, who is Jesus Christ. All of us at our baptism had a light lit when we were baptized. It came off of the Paschal candle. And it was handed to your godparents. And you were told, keep this light burning brightly. In other words, keep this child in a state of grace. Help this child enter into a state of grace. As an adult, remain in a state of grace. And the perfect example of who we need to look to is the Blessed Mother herself. When she greeted her cousin Elizabeth, what did Elizabeth say? She could see the light emanating from her. You are full of grace. Let's be like that. When we walk into a room, I want everybody to look at you and see the glow of grace coming out of you. When you walk into a room, I want someone to go, look at you, you are filled with grace. I love you. I want to be with you. I want to understand. I want to be, who is it that came to me? You're carrying your Savior. You're carrying the grace of God. Carry that into the world. Because when the time comes, that's what we're going to be asked about. How did you love? Did you love with the love of God? Did you love even your enemies? My dear brothers and sisters, be ready, please. Be ready. God bless you.